is Gary, and my son is Cade, and we started Prolotherapy here back in April of 2019, around April, and now it's October 2019, and we're now on to our sixth treatment of Prolotherapy to my son's cervical spine from C1 to T1. So that's what we're treating. So the way everything, just how this all started was, my son was a very active child. He was in martial arts. He was a BMX bicycle rider. He rode motorcycles, flew RC airplanes. He was a really active kid. And when he was 9 years old, I was with him at the house, and he was on the floor playing Legos with a friend. I was on the couch, and just out of the blue, no warning, no nothing, he just stood up screaming bloody murder that he was dizzy. And he ran for me, he dove in my lap, and he was just telling me, help me, help me, help me, save me, save me, save me. It just blindsided me. I didn't know what was going on. And he wanted to go home right away. We were at a friend's house. And so we took him home, and he went to bed, and the next day, we weren't quite sure what happened, but he got through that Saturday. It was a Friday on his first attack. And so he got through that day, and then the next day he went to go fly his RC airplanes. He was flying this airplane, and he had another attack. And he dropped his radio on the ground, and he just hung on to me, and he said, "Dad, there's something wrong. You need to take me to the emergency room." So I took him to the emergency room, and they did, what they do in emergency rooms, and took x-rays and whatever they do. And that's really where my story begins. His attacks got worse and worse over the years. In the beginning, when he was 9 years old, 10 years old, he would have an attack and he would fall on the ground. He would just die wherever he was. He would just dive for the couch, or he would dive on the ground. We could be in a grocery store or whatever. And when he had an attack, it would last usually like an hour. And he would tell me he's dizzy. And he also had this tingling sensation that traveled throughout his body. It's hard for him to explain, but it could be in his feet, and then it would travel to his thighs, and it'll travel to his chest. It'll travel to his back. It just travels all around while he's having this attack, this whatever sensation. The way he puts it, he says it feels like the chills, kind of like the chills feeling. And then when the attack stopped, this feeling would all go away, and he would just pull out of it, and he would just kind of go on about his business. But he was conscious the whole time. He never blacked out. He could talk while he's having an attack. And like I said, they just got worse and worse and worse. And by the time he was in 8th grade, he was in a wheelchair. He was home hospital taught. A teacher would come to the house once a week, home hospital taught. And he was having about, I would say, 10 to 20 attacks a day at that time. We, over the course of almost 8 years, we saw probably somewhere between 50 to 60 doctors, specialists of all kinds. In the early years, we did the typical vestibular inner ear, so we thought, okay, this is an inner ear issue, crystals, a benign positional vertigo, that kind of, we ruled all of that out. So over 7 years, we saw probably 50 doctors. We went through 5 hospitals, UCLA, USC, Cedars, Children's, you name it. We went through all these hospitals, and nobody ever said anything about cervical instability or cervicogenic dizziness or anything like that. They took all of their x-rays. We had, I don't know how many MRIs. We did all of these tests, from cardio to tumors to diseases to genetic disorders we did everything we could ophthalmologists. We did overnight studies, surveillance. They put all the wires on my son's head and checked for seizures. Everything came out negative. Every test we ever did, it all came out negative. We just could not figure out why my son was having these attacks, and it was just the most frustrating thing that ever happened in my life, for your child to be suffering like this, and you just can't figure it out. And your son is saying, or your child is saying, "Dad, when is this going to end?" And that's why I never stopped. So we ended up at UCLA, and we saw Dr. Gail Ishiana there. She's a neuro-otologist. She was the first one to start prescribing medications because she thought my son may have been suffering from a migraine variant or a vestibular migraine or some sort. So she tried 2 different medications over a period of 4 months, and they didn't work. So she, after 4 months, she said, I want you to go see a pediatric rheumatologist and a psychiatrist. In the end, some of the doctors were sending me to a psychiatrist. So I said, a pediatric rheumatologist, there's one we haven't seen. Went and saw Dr. Albert Katz. He noticed that my son's muscles up and down his back into his neck were tight. He goes, your son's muscles are really tight. And also too, over the years, my son would get torticollis. When he started having multiple attacks, also in the early years, when he had attacks, he'd have 1 a day, and that was it. And then after, whatever it was, 2 or 3 years, for the first time he started having multiple attacks a day. But they weren't lasting an hour. They would last maybe 20 minutes, or 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. So we saw this pediatric rheumatologist, and he prescribed cyclobenzaprine, a muscle relaxer. So I gave him 5 milligrams of cyclobenzaprine that one night. The next day, he had no attacks. Reminding me, he was having 10 to 20 attacks a day. Next day, no attacks. Next day, no attacks. Next day, the muscle relaxer stopped his attacks overnight. And he was attack-free for nearly 10 months. So he was on this 5 milligrams of this muscle relaxer, and he had the torticollis, and the doctors would send me to a physical therapist and, try to straighten out his neck. We even did Botox injections for 1 year at USC with the movement disorder department, Dr. Fejenbaum. And she was also seeing Dr. Sahai, who's a neuromuscular doctor over there. So he was getting Botox injections every 3 months for a year to try to help loosen his muscles. So we went through all of that too. It helped a little bit, not a lot, but it helped, kind of loosen his muscles. And 3 months later, you got to go back for another round of injections. But it was a temporary thing. But we did that for a year too. So he's on his 5 milligrams, right? He had this neck issue, and he was also getting some scoliosis, which we think is from his neck and just everything being off threw his back out. So I ended up taking him to a chiropractor near where I live. And this chiropractor said, bring him in and, we'll take a look at him. Maybe we can help his scoliosis and work on him. So I ended up doing that. And he was doing the whole chiropractic thing and twisting his back and shifting his neck and all of these things, right? Well, one day he did this thing called the Graston maneuver on my son's neck. And my son said, yeah, they did this thing, on my neck. And I said, oh, what was that? And he goes, yeah, they took this thing or something, and they compressed my neck. And my son, after that treatment, he goes, oh, I'm feeling pretty good, after that treatment. And remember, he'd been attack-free for months on this muscle relaxer. The next day, his attacks came back. They came back. And I'm like, oh, what have I done? Right? Went back to the chiropractor, and he's like, okay, they should stop. Kept him on the muscle relaxer, the 5 milligrams. And in 9 days, they stopped. So here we are. He did this compression on these muscles in here, brought the attacks back. He was in school. He missed 2 weeks of school because of that treatment. But after 9 days, he went back to school. We continued with the chiropractic treatment. He's just worked on the back, and he stayed away from the neck. And then he told me, well, there's trigger points in the neck. Maybe we should break down those muscles and try to, get the muscle to relax. And we talked about it, and we ended up doing it again in the summer. It was in the summer. He did the Graston again. Remember, he was attack-free. He did it again. The attacks came back. I regret it. But they came back, and this time they didn't stop. He was back to where he was, and his attacks came back. So here they are, he's having these attacks throughout the day. They didn't stop. And because I originally got 15 milligrams, I decided I'm going to up the dose. So I ended up giving him 3 pills a day. Still having the attacks, but I noticed that the attacks were kind of happening between the doses of the cyclobenzaprine. I went online and it said, oh, these pills last like 6 hours, but it takes a half an hour for them to kick in. And I thought, I'm gonna give it to him every 5 hours. So I started giving it to him every 5 hours. Boom, his attack stopped. That was Christmas of a year ago. Got the attacks to stop. He was on 15 milligrams a day, giving it to him every 5 hours. And I thought, wow, I got them to stop again because I'm keeping this medication in his system. I went to my pharmacist and I said, I'm giving him these 3 pills a day. Is there something else I can do? He goes, well, there's this thing called Amrex. It's a time-released muscle relaxer. So we put him on the time release. We transitioned him from 3 a day to this 1 pill a day, 30 milligrams. And we kept him attack free with this 30 milligrams. So now we went from 5, the chiropractor did the Graston, triggered whatever was going on, which was another clue for me that it's in his neck, right? Even the doctors, I would tell them, I did this thing, it's in, and they wouldn't address it. They wouldn't say, oh. So yeah, he's on this 30 milligrams. So I kept him on that. And like I said, January 8th, 2019, just this last whatever, they came back on the 30 milligrams. And I went to the doctor and they said, we're not gonna give him any more. We're maxed out on the 30 milligrams. That's when I went to Christopher Reeve's website, next to my wife. She mentioned that. If it wasn't for me going to the Christopher Reeve's website, maybe I wouldn't have found Caring Medical and I wouldn't be here today. And for us, and everything that we've been through, and I'm being nobody's paying me to do this interview. My son was crying for help, and Caring Medical was really, I think, my last bastion of hope to save my son's life. And he's doing, he's not perfect, but it's come a long way from where we've been. Yeah, long way. He's got his life back now. One thing I never really understood was, sometimes, some people, they have maybe a pinched nerve in their neck and they have pain. My son has never had pain. And I do want to share this. There's a clue. When my son was 3.5 years old, he was bouncing on my bed. My bed is higher than my windowsill. I was in the kitchen cooking. I heard a bang and a cry, and I rushed into my room. My son flew, from what he told me at 3.5 years old, he said he flew off the bed, which probably maybe is 5-6 feet or more, and slammed his neck on the windowsill. He slammed his neck right on the edge of that windowsill. And that day was scary. He was curled up in a ball, in a fetal position. He was shaking like a leaf. I called 911, fire department, ambulance, everybody came, put him on a board, neck brace, the whole thing, and we rushed him to the emergency room. And they did their thing, at the emergency room, and they sent him home. And that was the end of it. And I would tell the doctors, I would say, hey, what about that accident he had, when he was 3? Well, we don't really think there's a connection, whatever. Who knows? I don't know. But as far as I know, that's really the only. He did have a little thing on a diving board once, where he kind of flew and banged it or whatever on a diving board. But that one accident, that's. I think that's what caused all of this. I cannot think of another reason why this would have happened. So I knew it was in the neck. And there was a neck issue, and I kept asking the doctors, what is going on with my son's neck? And I would go to these specialists, UCLA, and these spine centers, and they would send me home. They said, well, we really don't see anything. I'm like, well, what's going on with his neck? I mean, he could barely move it now. He can't move it to the left. He panics when he tilts it back, the whole thing. So his attacks came back on January 8th, this last year, and he maxed out on the muscle relaxer. He was up to 30 milligrams of a muscle relaxer. The doctors would not prescribe any more than that, but his attacks came back on January 8th of 2019. And here he was, suffering again, right? He was having all these attacks that came back. So here I am, back to square one. And I knew the muscle relaxer probably wasn't gonna last forever. And even my son told me, he goes, Dad, I knew that it wasn't gonna last forever. They're back. So this last winter, I buckled down again and I got on the internet. And my wife just, I started saying, you know what? I'm going to start looking at broken necks, paralyzed, the most extreme cases of neck injuries, which I had not done before. And so I was on the internet, and my wife said, why don't you go to that Christopher Reeves website, the Christopher Reeves Foundation, Superman, that had broke his neck. And I said, oh yeah, I'll go to that. So I went to Christopher Reeves' website, started reading through there, and on the same browser page, maybe like 4 or 5, websites down, was Caring Medical, right? And I clicked on Caring Medical, and I saw Dr. Hauser, and I saw the videos, and stem cell, and prolotherapy, which I never heard of. Not one doctor ever said anything to me about stem cell or prolotherapy. And I started to read terminology like cervical instability, cervicogenic dizziness. And I'm looking at this, and I'm like, bingo. I think this is it. I think it's coming from the neck, right? So I called Caring Medical and talked to you guys, and you guys interviewed me at some point for like an hour or something. I told my whole story like I'm kind of telling it now. And then I got an email from you guys saying that, hey, we think we can help your son. And I was like, wow, right? At the same time, I was trying to get my son into the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. I had all of my reports from all the hospitals, the doctors. I had a book this thick full of all of my son's reports over 8 years. And they accepted him over there. I got a letter of acceptance. They reviewed all his reports, the whole thing, blah, blah, blah. And I was getting ready to go to Rochester, Minnesota, but at the same time, I came across Caring Medical. And I was also talking to you guys. And you offered this thing called the DMX, the digital motion x-ray, which I thought, that's what I want. I want to see what's going on in his neck. So I decided, we're going to set up an appointment. I flew out to Caring Medical from California, came out here, he did the DMX, and lo and behold, boom, there it was. Slip C1, C2, C3. We saw everything in what was going on in his neck. His C1 and his C2, when he tilted his head this way, it slipped. It was slipping off to the left like that, and his C3 was slipping forward. He had a military neck, and on a scale of 1 to 10, Dr. David Woznicka told me he's probably about an 8. So that's what happened. I had your DMX and your reports sent over to Mayo Clinic. I wanted to get a second opinion. Sent them all over there. Remember, my son got accepted to Mayo Clinic with a letter. They called me after reviewing your information, called me on the phone, and they said, Mr. Hartman, this is a pediatric neurology, called me on the phone, and they said, we want to let you know we reviewed all of your latest findings, and we want to let you know there's nothing here that we can do for your son. But yeah, when I sat with Dr. Woznicka, and he showed me what was going on, So from there, we talked about prolotherapy, and that day we started prolotherapy. So when my son started prolotherapy back in April, his ROM, range of motion, was, his neck was like this, his muscles were pulled, he could barely turn it this way, he could barely move his head back, he would panic, and, his gait was off, and, he could, and he could barely walk, he was in a wheelchair. I brought him here in a wheelchair, and it was bad. It was bad. So that was 5-6 months ago now. So we just finished up our 6th treatment, and my son, like I said, was pretty much in bed 24 hours a day, except to go to the bathroom, that sort of thing. After the 3rd treatment, and Dr. Woznicka did tell us, he says, usually we might see some results after 3 or 4 treatments. And so after the 3rd treatment, I got my son out of bed, got him in the wheelchair, got him down to the airport, got him on the airplane, it's a big deal. So we're sitting in the airplane and we take off, right? We're taking off into the sky, and I'm sitting there, right? And my son goes, Dad, look. And he literally goes like this. Yeah, his muscles relaxed, and he moved with that pretty much full range of his head. And here we are, we just finished up our 6th treatment. He still has full range of his head. His muscles have relaxed. Dr. Waz, we call him Dr. Waz, I think it's about 50 injections. Something like, they numb his neck with about 20 injections, and then he's all numbed up, and then they go in and they numb. They give him about 50, maybe, I don't know, 50 or 60 injections, apparently every ligament up and down the cervical spine. It was kind of a slow, it was for him, it was like, wow, is this really happening? And it was a confidence thing, you know. He slowly started to, you know, walk around the house a little bit more. He became more talkative. You know, my wife and I noticed, you know, that he was more talkative and that sort of thing, laughing a little bit more. My son got into computers. When he was attack-free for those 10 months, he got interested in the computer, and that became his passion. And he built a YouTube channel, he has a following, and he's a live streamer and a gamer, and you know, my son is Cade, that's his name. In fact, his channel is EDAC. It's his name spelled backwards, E-D-A-C, EDAC. And he's a live streamer, does gaming and stuff like that, but through that, he became an editor. He started editing his own videos, live streams and stuff, and other people in the world that he knows started liking what he was doing in his editing, and he developed and built a business, an editing business. And he gets paid really well for a 17-year-old as an editor. So he is basically, he mastered editing, and he edits big-time live streamers. I mean, some of these kids are very wealthy. They have millions of subscribers. And so my son, last almost maybe a week and a half ago, he was telling me, he was saying, I think I'm gonna get back on the computer. And I said, that'd be great, you know, that'd be great. So lo and behold, he got back on his computer, and he started editing last week, and he's making money again, and he loves his business, and he's back online with all of his friends. He has friends all over the place in Australia, and I don't know where, you know, UK. He's got the microphone, and he's got the whole thing going on. So he's back sitting at his desk, and he's doing his thing. And it's a miracle. It's a total miracle. It's like my wife and I are just, we got our son back. It's not perfect. Also, his attacks, from what he tells me, before at a 10, where he would just dive for the ground and hang on for dear life during one of these attacks, now, or he's saying they're like a 3 or a 4. He's still having them, not as often, but it's more of an internal thing, and he manages it. It's like he doesn't have to fall to the ground anymore. I don't even know when he's having attacks now. He doesn't tell me. I don't know when he's having it, but he says he has them, you know, here and there. Also, too, after he has a treatment, his attacks, he has like more attacks, but they only last maybe like a second or 5 seconds or 15 seconds after a treatment because of the inflammation and everything. Something's causing him, you know, the nerves are getting fired off. From what I'm seeing, after a week or two, it dies back down. After the inflammation starts to die down, then it goes back. He might have an attack 1 a day, you know, but he doesn't drop. Like I said, he can have one sitting at his computer and he manages it. So what we're hoping for, when, you know, because we're looking at maybe about 12 treatments is what we were told. About every 5 weeks, we come back every 5 weeks. About every 5 weeks. So what I'm hoping for is that over time, as his neck becomes more and more stable, right, and all of that, I'm just hoping and praying that the attacks just kind of dissolve. You know, you think of kids in sports and football and high school and all of that, you know, and as a parent in the beginning, it was hard for me to like accept, like, this is happening to my child, you know. And, you know, the little parents are like, get off that computer, you know, get outside, you know, play, stuff like that. Well, for me, over some time, it was like, this is going to be my son's life. This is what he's passionate about. Yeah, it's gaming. He's on the computer. But you know what? He's not sitting around being depressed. And he found something. He found something to get him up in the morning and to keep him going. He did that on his own. He did all the editing stuff on his own. I mean, I built him his first computer. He started out with a little laptop at first, and he started doing his thing, and then I built him a gaming computer. And I thought, some parents, they spend a lot of money on football and travel sports and all these things that you do, right? Well, I put my money into a computer, and it's just different. He has friends all over the world.